Santiago Meza Lopez will have to stay behind bars for a lot longer after confessing to dissolving at least 300 bodies in acid for a drug cartel in Tijuana. According to Fernando Osejueda, president of the United Missing Persons of Baja California, Meza, 57, also known as El Pozolero, or someone who cooks pozole, a Mexican stew made with hominy, chicken, pork, and vegetables, was informed he was being denied a chance at freedom because he has not yet been sentenced for additional crimes. Welcome to the channel, to the world of everything related to the global underworld. Let's learn more by diving in. Ready? Let's go. The vicious thief known as El Pozolero killed over 300 victims by dissolving them in acid. Is about 58-year-old bricklayer Santiago Meza Lopez, who worked for the Arellano Felix Cartel in Tijuana, Mexico, dissolving the bodies that his high command sent to him. For the offenses of organized crime, criminal association, and clandestine burial, he received a 10-year prison term in 2012. Tijuana has served as a meeting place for cartels involved in drug trafficking in Mexico since at least 1990, particularly the Sinaloa and Arellano Felix gangs, which El Pozolero worked for. Up until 2008, Teodoro Garca, also known as El Teo, was one of the group's commanders. Then he broke away from his brother and joined his former adversaries. From that point on, Tijuana's streets saw an increase in violence that resulted in thousands of disappearances, many of whom were likely brought to El Pozolero. What makes Pozolero? His moniker is derived from the Mexican meal pozole, which is made with corn, chile, and pork. In Meza Lopez's instance, however, the preparation he used to dilute the bodies was a mixture of water and caustic soda into which the dismembered bodies were tossed and left to boil for a number of hours, according to what he informed the prosecutor's office at the time of his testimony. He was merely in charge of dissolving them for $600 a week, or a little more than 2 million pesos, according to his evidence, and he did not kill anyone. The bones and teeth that did not disintegrate were hauled to a field and burnt with gasoline before being buried. More than 17,000 human bones were unearthed in the mass graves that the authorities eventually discovered and which were connected to the local drug cartels. Between 300 and 650 are credited to El Pozolero. "I prefer my job to you starving to death," the man repeatedly told the detainees' relatives, according to information provided to the magazine Proceso by the family. He was an informant for the CIA, a drug dealer, and they executed him on Escobar's orders. The victims were who? The authorities point out that the bulk of those who would find themselves in that circumstance are likely to be adversaries of the cartel that was attempting to monopolize routes for drug trafficking in the area. It's also feasible that they were individuals with little to no involvement in drug trafficking. Some likely perished after being kidnapped for ransom or just killed for trivial disputes with risky cartel members. When El Pozolero was questioned about whether he recognized any of the photographs of the missing people, he denied doing so due to the way in which their bodies were disintegrated, which prevented a DNA research from being done to identify the remains. Many family members of those who had not been located set out in quest of something that could provide them with some type of hints as to their locations when the location of the graves was discovered, but they were unsuccessful. Later this year, Meza was eligible for parole. Since he hasn't yet received a sentence for his covert acts against humanity, his ties to organized crime, and his offense against public health, according to Osejueda, he still has a long wait in jail. He will also receive a sentence for possessing a weapon intended for use by the military. Meza was detained by the military in the border city of Ensenada in 2009, which is roughly 70 miles south of the border. Meza had ties with the Arellano Felix cartel, which at one point was in charge of regulating the flow of drugs from Tijuana into the United States. He admitted to making $600 every week by immersing corpses in the tub of acid and sodium hydroxide and stirring them for 8 hours until all of the body parts but the teeth, nails, and some bone fragments disintegrated. Whatever was left, according to Meza, would be burned and then interred in a vacant lot on his land. Meza reportedly told his family that he would rather undertake this kind of work than watch his kids starve to death. Investigators are said to have discovered 14,000 to 15,000 human remains buried on Meza's ranch after his arrest. The relatives of the people Santiago Meza Lopez claims to have targeted have appealed for forgiveness. Despite being detained on Thursday in Ensenada, Baja California, Santiago Meza Lopez's identity wasn't discovered by authorities for another day. The prominent drug trafficker known as El Teo, a drug lord, is claimed to be the employer of the man. In a video that the government has made public, Meza, who calls himself Teo's stewmaker, is shown tied and surrounded by guards. He claims that he was paid $600 a week for his macabre tasks. The victims, he claimed, were men who betrayed or owed Garcia something. Meza, a resident of Guamuchil, Sinaloa, was detained together with 3 other individuals. One of them was a young girl who claimed to have been hired for a social function. Police were looking for additional people in the neighborhood at the time, but they managed to flee, according to officials. Meza is now pleading for mercy. "Please forgive me, I beg the families," he pleaded. Police in Mexico have not explicitly stated whether they think Mesa's entire account is believable or not. He has disclosed to the police the locations of several of the graves. Authorities are currently looking for them with the assistance of citizen groups and the families of the missing. They believe Mesa could know where their friends and family members are. Garcia, according to the authorities, was a member of the Arellano Felix cartel but is now allegedly working with the Sinaloa cartel. Officials claim that after Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was arrested for drug trafficking in 1989, 7 brothers and 4 sisters of the Arellano Felix family assumed control of the drug cartel located in Tijuana, Mexico. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the infamous cartel is currently divided into 2 factions that have engaged in bloody combat that is to blame for almost all of the bloodshed in Tijuana. Over 400 people died in drug-related violence last year. In October, authorities made an arrest of Eduardo Arellano Felix, who they claimed to be the last surviving brother still actively involved in the cartel. The story of Santiago Meza Lopez, also known as El Pozolero, or the Soup Man, is a disturbing and graphic narrative that claims that he dissolved the bodies of 500 cartel victims in vats of acid. The use of real-life figures and organizations in this manner is disrespectful and in poor taste. The reality is that the disposal of bodies by dissolving them in acid is a gruesome and inhumane method that has been used by some criminal organizations. However, it is not a common practice, and it is not clear how many people, if any, have been killed in this way. The use of acid as a means of disposing of bodies is a war crime, and those who engage in such action should be held accountable for their actions. Furthermore, it is important to be aware that the portrayal of cartels in media can be misleading and glamorize their actions. Cartels are responsible for significant violence and human rights violations, and their activities have resulted in humanitarian crisis in countries like Mexico. It is important to remember that the true victims of cartel violence are innocent people who have lost their lives, families, and communities that have been torn apart, and entire countries that have been destabilized by their actions. In conclusion, the story of Santiago Meza Lopez, also known as El Pozolero, is a story that should not be taken as factual information or lightly. The use of real-life figures and organizations in this manner is disrespectful and in poor taste. The true victims of cartel violence are innocent people who have lost their lives, families, and communities that have been torn apart, and entire countries that have been destabilized by their actions. It is important to remember the real victims and not to glamorize the criminal activities of cartels. The gruesome nature of this is just a proof the world is darker than we see it to be. Thank you for watching. Follow for more.